and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules, and at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. I'm thrilled to start this interview, folks. I'm on tenterhooks, if that's the proper expression. But I'm just psyched and amped to have this conversation tonight. A little in the interest of full transparency, there's a lot of kismet that went into tonight's interview. Our guest is Justin McHenry. He's an author. We'll find out more about his background in a moment. He's written a fantastic new book. But the kismet element of it is we brought back Binnall of America, as many people recall, in October. And Justin made a very kind comment about the show on Threads, of all places, where I barely post. But I got the notification. I looked at it. Super kind. He likened me to Studs Terkel, which made me have to Google Studs Terkel. And then I'm like, oh, wow, that's a really impressive comparison. And I appreciate that. And it was really nice. I'm like, wow, this guy, really cool. So I click on his profile, and I see that he's written a book that at this time was coming out in a few weeks on Lemuria. And not a crazy person's version of a book on Lemuria, but an actual academic exploration of Lemuria. So the book, Lemuria, A True Story of a Fake Place, and we're not on video right now. I'll hold it up. I wish people could see. It's got the most fantastic cover with the face of a lemur on it. And I was like, holy shit, an academic exploration of the evolution of Lemuria. I'm like, I have got to get this guy on the fucking show. This is right in my wheelhouse. So I get the book. Justin's kind enough to have the book sent along to me, and I read it. As people know, I like to time this out to when I'm going to have the guest on. So I read the book over the long weekend, and just as soon as I cracked it open, I was like, this is going to be a wild ride. And it is so incredibly well researched. Like from the very beginning, and we'll get into this, but obviously lemurs play a role in this. But Justin's not content just to say lemurs play. He tells you about like the entire fucking background on lemurs and the species and all this stuff. And I'm like, I am in for a fucking adventure right now. And I'm only on like page 10 because I'm like, I am going to finish this book and learn so much. And that is what happened. I finished the book and I'm like, it is a tour de force, folks. That is I give it the highest recommendation I possibly can here on Binnall of America. I absolutely loved it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book, Justin, but I likened it, as I was reading it, to Christine Garwood's Flat Earth, The History of an Infamous Idea. I don't know if you haven't read that. You should check that out. Because it's essentially like sort of it takes the idea. The book mirror each other in a lot of ways. It sort of traces the history of the flat Earth from when it first came up in the 1860s as a conspiracy theory up into 2008 when the book came out. So, and this book is exactly of the same idea. It is tremendous. It really is. Hats off to you, man. I warned you ahead of time before we started the show. I was going to be effusive in my praise, but I absolutely fucking love this book. So I cannot wait to talk to you about it tonight. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you, obviously, for the kind words a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And the kismet that inspired this. Believe me, I'm just amazed by the whole turn of events. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really looking forward to this, as people can tell.
Well, thank you, Tim, for having me. I have been a BOA listener for, over a decade now. Almost 15 years. I think I got into it from going through a Jim Mars phase. And so, just like looking up more stuff on him and finding him, all the episodes that you did with him. And then ever since then, I've been a solid listener and so thrilled for the revival to come back as well. And so it's,
awesome.
if I could will myself to be on this show, I did it with this book, and I'm happy to do so. So
right,
it was amazing.
And believe me, folks, like there was no chicanery involved. Justin wasn't like, "Oh, I'm so glad the show's back. By the way, you should have me on." He made no mention of the book.
I know.
If I hadn't clicked on his profile, I would have gone merrily on my way, and because I don't even go on Thread, so it's like, like I said, it was total kismet. So. Well, you're a listener, so you kind of know the way of the BOA. So give us the bio, the background. Who is Justin McHenry? How'd you get interested in all this strange and unusual stuff? And ultimately, what led you to Lemuria?
Okay. So, I'm a historian, and by day, I'm an archivist. So I just live in the kind of history world most of the time. I got a bachelor's and a master's degree in history. And I've always loved the weird and esoteric. So I guess maybe started with growing up on Unsolved Mysteries. And then I just remember as a kid, like watching the especially the alien abduction episodes, and just staying awake hours at a time just for like a great big white light to come fill my room and take me away. So it really had, and kind of morphed into loving the X-Files, and ever since then I've just been living in this world. And so looking for a topic to write on, and kind of being in this world and knowing running around in those circles, you kind of hear the name Lemuria over here. You hear listening to this stuff about Blavatsky, or reading about Madame Blavatsky, and seeing what she brings up, knowing about the Shaver mysteries and that connection. And so I was just like, let's just look into it a little bit more. And looking into it more, there hasn't really been a lot written seriously about it. There's been a lot, I would say, people taking it literally, and actually believing that there was a continent out in the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Oceans and things like that. And so just looking at the idea of Lemuria kind of like drew me in, and also because it covers such a wide variety of topics, from you got the 19th century science history on up to the occult history, and then you get like alternative religious and political history. And so I'm a kind of a generalist, and so just having that scope there really spoke to me.
Right. I think that's kind of why it resonated with me too, because it's like it covers so much stuff. It was like it really. I think, again, kind of why I'm also so effusive in my praise. It was a necessary book. Like, this book needed to be written, because when I really thought about it, I'm sure you kind of felt the same way as you was getting started. It's like, what does anyone really fucking know about this Lemuria? It just pops up everywhere. It's used all the time. Like, I'm sure we do have an understanding of where it came from, but it's like, how the fuck did it go from, how the hell did this happen? That Lemuria is this, like, kid brother to Atlantis, and it shows up everywhere all the time. And it's like, what? No one ever asks the question of, like, what's the deal with Lemuria until this book came out. So it fills a niche that I didn't realize in my own mind, that I hadn't really given much thought to, which is like, where is this? What is the story here with Lemuria? So, we'll start out with the real history. And what I liked about the book too was you say right from the get-go, you're like, look, I do this because I've done presentations on Flat Earth based on my investigations into the conspiracy community. And I'm always like, look, I'm not here to argue with people. I'm not here to even tell you how the Flat Earth works. So it's like you kind of establish that same attitude in the book. It's like, look, we're not here to proselytize about Lemuria. We're here to talk about fucking the evolution of this idea. Which is huge. So because hopefully if you go on a few other shows, you don't run into the same thing I do. People start trying to poke holes in the theory, and it's like, look, I poke all you want, man. I don't care.
It's right there in the title too, what I think. So it's not
exactly.
like
right. Exactly. Yeah. A true story of a fake place. Absolutely. So what's interesting to me, and I didn't realize this from the get-go, and I'll sort of set you up here to expound on this. So these are sort of less questions, more observations from as I read the book, was that we do know where Lemuria came from. Like, we actually have the actual moment in historical record in the book where it's like, this is the first time this guy fucking just says, we're going to call this Lemuria. So tell people about the origin of Lemuria, the actual first time it popped up, and why. Because this was fascinating to me, again, because it was, to me, in my mind, I always just assumed that this thing sprung up like the Atlantis story. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's actually a scientific background to Lemuria. There's a reason why this thing came into our zeitgeist. Someone fucking put it there with an actual, like, I don't want to say noble, but certainly unscrupulous reason. It was like he was putting forth a valid theory at the time. Yeah. So fire away. Tell us about the origins of Lemuria.
And he just dropped that name right at the end of what he was writing too, like, which is kind of like amazing that it was just like his mic drop was Lemuria. And so, and unlike Atlantis, which comes from Plato, and it has, like, even in Plato's writing, it's kind of, he has like a vague saying, like, you know, this person said this about Atlantis. And so it's kind of like third and fourth tellings of it. But Lemuria has a very, very specific beginning, right? And it's all comes from a guy, a 19th century British ornithologist, a guy named Philip Lutley Schlater. And so he was just taking a look at the mammals of Madagascar and how all of the creatures got onto Madagascar, because Madagascar is famously an island, kind of isolated out there in the Indian Ocean. And so the most famous occupants on Madagascar are lemurs. And so he spent a lot of this, his talk on going over about basically just describing lemurs and all of that stuff. And then at the very end of his talk or his lecture, he starts going into, well, how did lemurs get there? And then he starts bringing up, like, well, there's, you know, lemur-like species in South America. There's lemur-like species in Africa. There's lemurs in Madagascar, and there's, you know, lemur-like species in India. So just because of the thinking at the time, there had to have been a land bridge that connected all of those places, which accounted for lemurs getting onto Madagascar. And that land bridge disappeared over time for some whatever reason, and it left lemurs stranded on the island there. And then at the very end, he just says, you know what, let's just call that place Lemuria, based on lemurs being there too. So it does have a very, like, specific and set in stone, like no time before then was like the idea of a land bridge connecting all those places, or was Lemuria ever a thing. So
right. Yeah,
that's a very specific thing. Yeah,
it kind of fucking blew my mind when I discovered this in the book. And I'm sure people, I'm sure if you go on Wikipedia, and I call it Lemuria, but is it Lemuria, or anyone can just say it however you want?
It's however you want to say it. It's like Appalachia or Appalachia. So it's just, okay. It's whatever you want to.
So, I had never, that kind of just blew my mind that it was like, oh, here's the thing, and we'll just call it Lemuria because we're trying to figure out the lemurs. And it's like, oh, such an innocent beginnings to this world that becomes exotic and supernatural and fascinating and crazy.
And it happened like that too, like the transition from this scientific Lemuria to the, like, occult Lemuria happened within 20 years. So it was pretty quick in the time there.
Right. And what's interesting is the time this is coming up is, and I as I said, this rang a lot of bells from my flat Earth research, because it's sort of the same time this was percolating, the conspiracy, where it was like science is emerging and codifying, and at the same time there are these people, these quasi-scientists, and they're all interesting characters in a way where they're all kind of like, they have like a million different affectations. He's a rock scientist, and he's also an insect expert who has a passing interest in astronomy, So it's like all these people who kind of dabble in all these different sciences, and they're all like men of high renown too.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, it's like, so they probably, they're wealthy enough to fucking be a part-time geologist and also insect expert and rock whatever. So all this is going on, and people are trying to figure out the whole process of thing. It turns to figuring out human ancestry essentially. So that's kind of where then Lemuria then gets picked up and turned into the cradle of civilization, right? Haeckel is the guy the German, one of these multi-hyphenates who's like, you know what, Lemuria, we're going to fucking say that's where they all came from. Which is like, what the fuck? This dude, Sklar just fucking invented it out of thin air, dude. You can't do that, but he does. And it's cool.
Yeah. And that was the moment. It kind of like solidified Lemuria as a place, was when Ernst Haeckel came out and was like, you know what, let's just because he was doing it based on evolution. And so he had read Darwin, and he became such a fanboy of Darwin that he was like the pit bull for him. And he was the Jazzy Jeff to Darwin's Will Smith. So he was out there like just hyping him up nonstop. And so he was, as part of that, he, wrote many books on evolution and just like trying to prove evolution. And so he was, in Darwin's first book, the
Species?
The origins of species.
Okay.
He didn't go into human evolution at all. He thought it was be too much of a grenade to throw out there and explode everything. So he just threw out the idea of evolution and natural selection and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then
that makes sense.
in between that and The Descent of Man, his next book, which actually goes into evolution, Haeckel comes out with his book, The History of Creation. And it's basically all about human evolution. And so he needed like a paradise to plant evolution onto. And for him, that paradise was Lemuria, just because it was out there in the middle of the Indian Ocean, in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's like a beautiful place, and very like, the islands that are there now are, like paradise in themselves. And so it was like perfect weather, perfect everything. And so he was like, hey, Lemuria is as good a place as any to stick the proto-humans that are out there. And then, so that's where humanity grew up, and they, moved off Lemuria into, Africa and into Asia and everything else. And so that was really the seed that he planted there.
Yeah, as you say in the book, he put people on Lemuria, and that was the start of.
And once you put people on someplace, they never leave. So it's
right.
Yeah, he done did a thing, and it's.
Yeah. What amazed me too, reading about the thoughts of the time when this was kind of percolating, the land bridge, and could it be a sunken continent and all that, it was like, and you point out in the book, like it amazes me, like they never. It took a while. It wasn't for a little while until they kind of figured out all these continents like kind of fit together. It's like, how did you not fucking notice that? Like they fit together so perfectly. How did you? But they thought that this was just. That by some, I guess no one ever really questioned it, but by happenstance, they just thought these things were stuck in place, and they couldn't move around or anything.
Yeah,
which I guess kind of makes sense if you're in that time period. But still, how do you not notice they all fit together so perfectly? That's the weirdest part.
Yeah. I actually had a buddy text me this today. Was like, how did they not know? Like, what? Like, were the maps that bad at that time that they can't figure it out? I was like, no, it's mostly. I think it's twofold. It's lack of imagination on a lot of the scientists' part, and also ego too on their part, because they don't want to admit that what they've been studying their whole lives is wrong, and all of that kind of thing. And that's you get that with. The backlash to evolution, like at least the scientific backlash to evolution in the 19th century. You just have a lot of scientists just flat out saying it's wrong, only because if it's wrong, their whole careers and their whole lives have been wrong. And so you get a lot of that with like the movement of the continents and everything else. So it's like it wasn't until like the early 20th century that Alfred Wegener just took a look at the map and like, oh wait, this map, they all fit together like a puzzle, right? And then it wasn't even another like 50 years after he said that I guess the technology caught up with his idea, and they were like, oh yeah, this guy was right actually all along. So
yeah, it's crazy. It's really like, wow, how they miss that?
Yeah. Right. It's like you just look at like South America and Africa and how like
that's the big one. Yeah, they like perfectly.
They can
like
swim so easily. They're just like such cuddle buddies that it would be. It's hard not to figure that out.
Yeah, it's very weird. And I don't know. I mean, you were kind of not necessarily making. You were kind of making the point at the very beginning of the book, sort of that the whole idea of this like lost continent is kind of like a continent's a huge fucking place. You can't really lose a continent.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, maybe because we haven't seen it happen here in our lifetime, but it's like I just find it unfathomable, this idea of a world, and I'm not like arguing for or against Lemuria, of a world of something just being sunk, that got a whole landmass could be sunk by a nuclear catastrophe or whatever. All these different all the many theories for why they claims, I guess you could say, for why Lemuria sunk. It's like I just don't buy the idea, period, of a fucking continent sinking into the ocean. To me, it sounds unfathomable almost.
It is just because there's have been very recent, like within the last year, they've been doing a lot of scientific studies on a place called Zealandia, which was a continent that surrounded New Zealand, basically. And so the scientific teams down there are doing dredging and all that kind of stuff. And it's such a good, for this talk, it's such a good example of how a continent actually gets lost, because it takes millions and millions, tens of millions of years for Zealandia's case, it was Australia, Zealandia, and Antarctica all together, and they started breaking up when the continent started breaking up. And then as that broke up, like the plate underneath Zealandia started shifting and spreading, and just it started sinking, slowly and slowly over, tens of millions of years until you get what we have now, which is the island of New Zealand. So it's like, to think that something that took 50, 75 million years happened in like a weekend, which is the story that happened with like Atlantis and Lemuria both. They both have similar demises. So it's kind of crazy to think that was happened.
Yeah, it's really it's wild. It's
especially for the size of Lemuria, which, depending on who you talk to, it basically almost took up the whole Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is really fucking big too, and so it's like for something like that to like fall down and not only fall down, but we have proof that the island nations that are there now come from like volcanic activity, like they've just slowly built up through volcanic activity. So that means Lemuria had to sink. Then volcanoes had to, like underwater volcanoes had to come up and then like make those, like, so it's, because some of these, like you're saying, some of these theorists, let's call them, would like describe this massive, and I'm like reading the thing, and I'm like, where the fuck is all the ocean then? If this thing takes up the entirety of the Pacific Ocean, where are you putting the Pacific Ocean then? Because you're keeping all the other land masses too. So it's like, this is crazy. Yeah. The Pacific Ocean was like the Mississippi River between Lemuria and Asia. So
it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
And it's crazy to think too, because in further iterations, the west coast of America was the east coast of Lemuria. So it's like, that's just...
Right, that really confused me, because then it was like, so what the fuck is the rest of America then? So so is all of America Lemuria? Yeah, it's very, very, very strange. Now, I'm effusive in my praise of this book. People who, like me, love eccentric characters, you're going to fucking love this book, because this book is chock full of eccentric characters, and believe me, they're off more. 99% they're more interesting than the paranormal phenomena, because that shit's just lights in the sky or a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Like these are people who are fucking strange.
Yeah.
So
even the scientists too, like those were like eccentric, interesting people too.
Yeah, just this book is chock full of eccentric people. Now, one of the people I wanted to ask you about is Ignatius Donnelly.
Okay.
So give us a thumbnail on Ignatius Donnelly and because what I really like about the book too is you pinpoint these specific characters who then, like, we're kind of getting into the Atlantis part of the book, and you mentioned like Plato. You say about Plato, it's like, this fucking guy. You don't say it that way, of course. You're you're a very academic man, but this fucking guy, his thing, his Atlantis, is still going. It's still churning around 2,500 fucking years later. Like, I cannot. It's unfathomable the impact. That is just insane level of impact on human culture by just fucking throwing out this Atlantis thing and telling this fucking story. So Ignatius Donnelly, I'll sort of set you up here. Like I said, these are less questions, more observations in a way. But it's like, you get into Atlantis because Atlantis is sort of like the big brother to Lemuria in a lot of ways in the esoteric milieu. Mm-hmm. And you talk about how Ignatius Donnelly, he sort of popularized this in the more modern times, 1800s. But you specifically point out, tying this back to my observation, or your observation about Plato that I cited, that you say Ignatius Donnelly kind of helped create the playbook for conspiracy theorists by plucking from all these different sources and different disciplines and stuff, and not necessarily kind of like, so long as they supported his fucking argument, it didn't really matter where they came from, who wrote it, what the background of this sort. He just kind of was like, here is the old meme of Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Yeah. He was this guy. Ignatius Donnelly was the prototype conspiracy theorist. Yeah, putting forward, arguing in favor of Atlantis, essentially. Yeah. So that's kind of the setup. But tell us more about this character, because he was truly an interesting character.
Yeah, he's a good American original. He was everything in life. He was a lawyer, then he became a politician, then he became a failed farmer, and then he became a failed politician, and then he became a conspiracy theorist, and then a science fiction writer, and then like a failed vice presidential candidate. So he was a little bit of every, and he also dabbled in the Shakespeare authorship debate as well. And he had a popular, and he also, like, his book after, so his famous Atlantis book is Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And then the book right after that, so that was a huge success. And so he followed that up with a book called Ragnarok, Fire and Gravel or something like that. And it's just all a huge tome on how gravel came about, like how the world's gravel population came about. And so it's the strangest thing in the world. And so, he served in the House of Representatives, the American House of Representatives, during the Civil War. And so he was much, into the American political sphere. He was a populist later in life, and following along that. He was born in Pennsylvania, but he quickly moved kind of out to Minnesota and just kind of established his political career out there in Minnesota. And it was like in one of his political laws in the 1880s that he got excited about Atlantis and it just took off. And so, as you said, like, he was pulling from everywhere, and just connecting the dots. He was good at creating the dots and then connecting them himself too. So which is really a fascinating thing to do. And so he was pulling. He was kind of like the Diet Coke of all of the different subjects he was pulling from. So he wasn't like going really deep in depth. He was just skimming off the top of everything, right. And just putting it forth as, all proof that Atlantis existed. And it struck a chord with the populace, it became so popular that it was in print for the next 80 or something years. Right. And so it was a very, and the song Atlantis by Donovan references his book. So it's he was very much in the kind of zeitgeist of pop culture himself.
Right. That was one of the revelations, I think, in the book to me. We say Plato. Yes, Plato established this thing and created it, for lack of a better term, for all intents and purposes. But if you really, to give the devil his due, if you want to talk about Atlantis as sort of a fixture in the contemporary zeitgeist, it's Ignatius Donnelly who fucking is the guy that did it. He's the one who was like, hey, have y'all heard about this Atlantis thing? And then fucking boom, it has been a part of our culture ever since. Yeah. It really wasn't like the Atlantis that we know today before he did that. No. It was very spread out, and the people writing about it and talking about it were just there was centuries in between them, basically. And actually, right. There was almost 1,000 years between when it kind of died out in Greece, and then when it got popularized because some Italian translated the Plato's works and the Renaissance, and then it had a brief kind of period, and then it died out, and then it was Donnelly who put it all together and repackaged it and turned it into what is you don't get Atlantis like we understand it today without Ignatius Donnelly. All the Graham Hancock stuff and all of the other people out there talking about these lost worlds or searching for Atlantis. You don't get that without Ignatius Donnelly first coming forward and popularizing it and making people aware of it again, because otherwise they just wouldn't know about it. Yeah, it's crazy. It partially makes you wonder, what other shit is out there that makes you almost want to dig through that stuff and be like, well, what else has kind of popped up every few centuries? Oh yeah, I mean, well, Rosicrucianism is the same deal. It will ebb and flow every couple centuries, and so you get a lot of that stuff. And that's part of the things I like doing is looking at where something comes from, digging back deep to where it comes from. And so in music, if you like 60s rock music or 60s blues rock music, then I kind of going going to the source. And, that's why I liking Robert Johnston and stuff like that. There you go. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. Yeah. Even you mentioned Donnelly. Yeah. He's the whole thing with the Shakespeare. He was a Shakespeare conspiracy theorist, which is fucking awesome. And it was earlier you mentioned I'm going to botch the name Russell Wallace or something. Yep. Alfred Russell Wallace. Yeah, and he was he got mixed up. You even give it just a brief mention in the book, but for my forte, he was mixed up with the flat Earth thing for a long time. So it's these guys got all fucking tangled up in all this crazy shit. and Alfred, another thing that would be interesting to us was Alfred Wallace he was also theorizing about life on Mars, in the late 19th century and stuff like that too. Yeah. And so he was a very interesting guy. And he was very, very deep into the flat Earth stuff, at least disproving the flat Earth theories. So there's a whole. He just for you, I don't know how much you know about this, but he got mixed up with the Haeckel essentially of flat Earth, who was the DJ Jazzy Jeff of flat Earth to the Schlater. Who kind of was just hey, look, there might be a flat Earth. And he was like, what? And fucking went nuts. So that guy who went nuts, he crossed paths with Russell Wallace, and they tangled for decades over. She tried to ruin his life and shit, essentially, because the guy, he proved that the Earth was round, and he's like, I'm going to fucking kill you. That was I'm no joke, folks. That was really it was 3 or 4 decades of just I'm going to fucking kill you, dude. You ruined my life. And there was money involved too. There was a prize to prove the
the Earth was flat or Earth was round, whatever. And
Yeah,
Wallace thought that he did it, and so he started suing the guy. It was it was very contentious. It was very fun. I think it's good fun stuff.
It's a great feud. So now we've established. So we're kind of going through the timeline of Lemuria. We're trying not folks have to get this book. We're just scratching the surface here, but we're going to go over this over the course of the conversation. But the depth of research in this is tremendous. So in the milieu, in the zeitgeist, so Lemuria is like this hypothetical world. Could have been the cradle of civilization, maybe. Who knows? And this is from the perspective of the population, not what we're saying on the show. This is what people of the day are kind of speculating on. Then, as you say, Madame Blavatsky comes into the fucking mix and blows up Lemuria and transforms it from a scientific idea to an esoteric idea, if you will. And, I mean, tell me about, I think this was probably the hardest chapter to read, and that has nothing to do with the book or with you or anything. I find her to be a cipher. Just like, am I wrong in this? It was like, she seemed kind of like, I don't know. She just gave me the heebie-jeebies.
I will say this. One of the great surprises that I came out from writing the book was how much I respected her afterwards and just her intellect, because she was taking a bunch. Yeah, she was taking a bunch of shit, like different shit, like Heikel, and she was doing like astronomy stuff, like hardcore science.
Oh yeah.
Reading and filtering in through her, her spectrum, and then pooping out the secret doctrine and all that stuff. Now she is seemingly purposely dense, and I think that's what makes it so hard to comprehend what's going on.
Right.
Because it was impossible for me to read what she was writing and trying to figure out what all is going on. And I don't know if she knows what's going on herself, or if she was just kind of just throwing ideas out there. But it's very, very, you get into the secret doctrine, and that's her major 2-volume work. That's I wouldn't even call it the Bible of theosophy. It's the dissertation of theosophy that just goes super in depth and you start getting into OVA level deep into into all kinds of shit in the secret doctrine. So it's not just her worldview. It's going down into cellular level kind of stuff. And that's just, it gets bogged down in that, and you can't really figure out what she's trying to make heads or tails of. But that she's it was amazing reading the secret doctrine, or at least the portions that I dealt with, because I couldn't read the whole thing just because it would destroy my mind, I think. Because just reading the parts that she delves into her kind of cosmic evolution theory, it's
intense.
It's very intense, but she's taken Heikel, she's taken Darwin, she's taken Russell, Alfred Russell Wallace, and all of these different scientific theories, and providing explanations for them, and then twisting them around into her own thinking too. And so it's impressive in one area, but it's also very hard to understand and hard to grasp just what is going on.
Yeah. I think it threw me for a loop. I think that's kind of where I was, just because I really haven't delved into Blavatsky very much at all. And in my, it's much like Lemuria, it's kind of been on the periphery of my knowledge, but it's but then as I'm reading the thing, I'm like, this is intense. This lady's got she's dropping some really dense shit. Like you were saying, it was.
She doesn't dumb it down for the idiots, man. She's writing she's writing for herself, it seems like. And if you don't understand it, then it's shame on you. But
right. You got to read it again or something, right?
Yeah. But I think the people who follow her claim to understand it, but they don't really.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. But yeah, she's an interesting character. It definitely
very, very much character. So. Yeah. And I get a feeling for her, it's like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
And so, like, she was doing all of her, like, kind of like cheap spiritualist shit. Like,
right.
So, like, all of, like, the knocking and when she's around and the whole Mahatma letters where they just kind of appear out of nowhere and stuff like that. And it's sort of like she was doing that just to kind of, like, prove her esoteric or occult bona fides.
Right. Well, I also got the impression, like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like there's a big chunk of her life where she's just like purportedly like traveling the world. And it gave me very like Jesus-y vibes.
Yeah.
Where it's like no one really knows. I felt it almost, left myself kind of wondering, like, is this fabricated? Did she kind of fabricate this colorful life as a world traveler who amassed all this knowledge? I mean, she was incredibly knowledgeable. So it's like clearly she had this tremendous wealth of knowledge, but it's all shrouded in sort of mystery as to like where the fuck she kind of got all this information. She kind of, I believe, like you say, at one point she eventually settles kind of in India and gets a lot of the stuff from there. But like she had purportedly traveled, she had traveled like all over the world and studied all this stuff. And it was, like I said, we don't really know that for sure. It's just kind of the apocryphal origin story, if you will, that she put forward.
Yeah. And it's like, she's creating her own backstory, by doing that and creating her own like myth making too on her part, to make her, I don't know, because like throughout writing the book, I was kind of surprised by, how much people's motivations played into everything. And some people's motivations are very clear. They just want power or money or whatever. Her motivations, always eluded me because I'm not sure what she was like going at. She never really sought out money, or anything like that. Like she was never rich. She's kind of, and after she became world famous or just more well known, it's not like she kind of just kept on mooching off of people. And that seems to be what she did in her dark period where, we don't know what was going on in her life, but she would go from place to place, kind of like mooching off of people. So she just kind of kept doing that. Even after, even after she became, Madame Blavatsky, the great Madame Blavatsky. And so it's very strange, but it's also like, I can respect that. It's like she never caved in. She never caved in and became something she isn't. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the myth making reminds me of Bob Dylan, actually, because that's kind of like what happened to him. He kind of burst on the scene and then fucking made up a whole bunch of different backstories as to how he got to New York. And it was like, most of them, they, because of our contemporary times, they can figure it out. We're like, yeah, that was bullshit, dude. He wasn't a dishwasher in West Virginia for like 6 months. We know for a fact that he was like living here or whatever. So, but like back then they didn't really know that. So like, it would appear in like newspaper articles. It was like, then he spent 6 months in West Virginia as a dishwasher. And that's where he learned harmonica from a guy who also worked with him or some shit. Because he just fucking made the story up in an interview with some writer to fuck with him, essentially. So it's very, I have to give a second look at Blavatsky. I think this book may have inspired a future delve into it up in all of America where we'll get someone who.
that would be because she is, I would think, she's probably one of the most influential people of the 19th century. Up there with Edison, just because her impact on the world and like culture today is still very much felt. Like all of the new age stuff that's around, interesting crystals and just any kind of new age thinking is like almost directly related to Blavatsky and kind of can be tied to that. You don't like, she brought the first like interest into, like Eastern religions and culture as well. And so, we don't have like the influx of that, wouldn't have happened as easily without her greasing the wheels and things like that. So
yeah. Well, you make a point in the book that at the time as it's like kind of all going on in the 1880s, you call it a critical time when science and the metaphysical were swirling around each other. So it's like people, by way of like the printing press and everything else, and this modernization that was occurring and set to kind of occur, was percolating, was happening and getting into the new century. And it was like people were asking these questions. Science was emerging. It was codifying. People were trying to figure out fucking everything, how all this, everything essentially, and put it down and figure it all out. At the same time, as you say, the metaphysical kind of aspect, she kind of injects this into the mix as explanations for a lot of stuff that science is trying to figure out at the same time. Yeah. So it's a very interesting brew, if you will.
And there's no this like set theory at the time. There's no set thinking. And like, it's very telling that she focuses on evolution throughout the Secret Doctrine, just because evolution was such a landmine that kind of blew everything up, blew all ideas, like set ideas in society, like not just science, but in all of society, all of religion too, just because before evolution, like for the thousands of years, the idea that, you know, we came from Adam and Eve, like we came from God, and that's where people came from. And for that idea to not be there anymore was very disruptive. And so in that disruptive atmosphere, you know, Blavatsky comes forward and says, hey, maybe we come from, you know, these star seeds and things like that. And so and people were like, yeah, maybe we do. Let's
yeah. And what's interesting is, she transforms Lemuria, but as you point out in the book, she, to her credit, is like, let's just call it Lemuria, but it could be anything. She doesn't mean the original Lemuria. She acknowledges the original Lemuria. She's like, this guy Sklar, essentially the whole first half hour of what we just talked about, folks. She blames it all out in her fucking book, and it's like, here's the history of this thing. So for all intents and purposes, it's good enough. It's good enough. Yeah. It works as an idea. So we'll just go with this Lemuria thing. I don't know if I really mean that the actual fucking Lemuria, which also is fake, but for all intents and purposes, we're going to call my mystical island that's a part of the evolutionary star process that even your old friend Binnall can't quite put his arms around, her whole ethos. And Lemuria is sort of a cog in this whole system of the evolution of humankind, if you will.
Yeah. And so, it is a very key point. So where Lemuria is the cradle of civilization. For Blavatsky, Lemuria is the cradle of spirituality. And it's part of her idea about root races. And so there's... Oh, crap. 7 root races?
7 root races. Yeah, it's complicated. She's got like 7 root races, and then there's like 7 sub races.
Yeah.
And it like evolves and changes over time and builds to the next one. And somewhere along the way is Lemuria in this thing.
So, Lemuria is the 3rd root race. The first 2 were kind of, first one was like just ethereal, just an idea, basically. And the second ones, they start like more like nebulous creatures. And then the creatures become actual beings, like physical beings on Lemuria. And then they kind of evolve during that period into, Cyclops, giants, and everything else until they kind of sort of become like human shaped. They're still at the end of the 3rd root race, I think, pretty tall. But
there's a lot of weird evolving going on this hypothetical island. I think, I don't know if it was Blavatsky or someone kind of who picked up her shit later or whatever, but you mentioned one point, it's like they have one eye and the gland in the middle and it sinks into the back of the head. And one of the things I really loved, moving a little bit off of Blavatsky for a moment, one of the things I loved about this is she opens the door for fucking people to start filling in all these crazy fucking details about Lemuria. And as you get on in the book, and the more people are presenting their accounts of Lemuria, it's like they just they start talking about the school systems on Lemuria. They're talking about fucking, the infrastructure and how the bridges are constructed. And it's like, you just make shit up out of whole cloth. It's like, oh my God, this is insane.
Yeah.
How these people, it just keeps collecting crazy fucking details and attributes that people just make up out of whole cloth in their claims about Lemuria over the subsequent years, which we're going to get into as we go along. But it's a recurring trend of people just ascribing all this crazy shit to Lemuria, where it's like, you don't fucking know what the school's like. Get out of here,
right?
Dude.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing that Blavatsky did was she cited her sources. And so even if those sources were her, ascended masters, like kind of speaking to her, she still cites them. And then she also cites Heikel and all the other people. And they're useful for her as like straw men to stand up for her and to argue against.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful to her. But like later iterations of Theosophists, they were like, who gives a shit? We don't need our sources. Let's just throw anything out. They all come from the Akashic record or whatever, and so that's good enough for us.
Yeah. As you kind of say in the book, it's that's the transformation point. You do say in the book that's the transformation point where it's like this thing goes from scientific possibility, theory, or whatever to esoteric concept. And then it's fucking off to the races.
Yeah.
It's like off to the races. And it's interesting. We talk about how dense and difficult to decipher the Blavatsky shit is. I almost imagine that maybe even the people of her day were like, yeah, look, I maybe got maybe a third of the way through it. And that's about it. Whatever you say. Because part of it's like the Lemuria thing. They just jump on it. They just kind of say Lemuria, and they don't even mention, as you say, they don't mention any of the origin part that Blavatsky talks about. They're just like, it's Lemuria, Lemuria, right? Everybody knows Lemuria. Come on, it's the sunken island. So no one ever talks about the scientific origins of it. Pretty much from that point forward.
Yeah, and I think it's like Lemuria pops up on like page 400. Of volume 2 of the Secret Doctrine. And so you have to get through, 800 pages of volume 1 and 400 pages into volume 2 until you get to this. And it's just like, I was just skimming it at that point, man. I saw Lemuria, I read a couple pages, and then it's just like, I'm moving forward. Like it's all good.
Yeah, it's intense. It's an intense, yeah.
And so I don't expect people to, at the time to, I don't know. I guess they have nothing better to do, so maybe they were more in tune.
Intensive, yeah. Well, I mean, look at
stuff.
Think of it this way: it's like people, like the way people like fucking got into Lost. They probably got into Blavatsky. They were just like, exchanging theories and shit. I imagine because they had nothing else really to occupy themselves with. And actually, it's kind of the same ilk in a way. It's like this metaphysical mystery thing, but. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
And the Theosophical Society is still going strong now, and it's still around. So whatever she did, man, she did it right because it's lasting long.
Right. It's you only tackle the Lemuria part of sort of her influence, but clearly, just from what we're talking about now, she took this scientific idea, transformed it into an esoteric concept. That happened with a lot of shit, I imagine, in her book. She took a lot of stuff that was sort of people were kicking around and wondering about, and then added this metaphysical, esoteric slant to it. And really, as you say, influence changed the culture to this day. Yeah.
And she did the same thing with Atlantis as well. And so all of the kind of mystical Atlantis stuff that's around now, like dolphins and like of Atlantis and things like that, like come directly from her doing the same thing with Atlantis. And then she also tied Atlantis and Lemuria together, and so afterwards, you don't really see Lemuria without Atlantis coming afterwards. So Lemuria was like the Woody Guthrie to Atlantis's Bob Dylan. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Well, obviously it's recency bias or whatever, and I really loved the book, but it's like I came out of this book being like, I love Lemuria, like fuck Atlantis, dude.
Yeah.
Like Atlantis is so overdone, and Lemuria is like the cool version of Atlantis. Like Atlantis is just commodified. It's ridiculous. It's so insane to like say. It's like, yeah, Atlantis. They have like a fucking boat or a cruise ship or an island. Or something
It's theme parks now and stuff like that. But Lemuria is like the cool cousin. Like it will like buy you cigarettes. It'll let you listen to fucking like Def Leppard and shit like that.
Yeah. Yes, Lemuria is the fun uncle.
Yeah.
And it's like, Lemuria is just like, hey, man, fucking, I'm Lemuria, dude. Let's do whatever the fuck we want. We're not Atlantis. We're not all fucking huffy over there.
We're fucking cool parents aren't around. You can do anything you want to.
Yeah. Here's a lighter. Get away from me. So, So, I came out of the book being like, I'm all about Lemuria, dude. That's the one. Now,
it's where Lost Continents go to get weird. Like, it's where they go to get, like, kinky and fun and let their hair down. So, it's a good time.
Absolutely. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. So I have in my notes here, I didn't put enough into it on this one because I just kind of wanted to mention, just for the completists in the audience, you also mentioned Churchward. He's the guy, for people who are like wondering, okay, what about Moo?
Yeah.
Okay, Moo is fucking Lemuria pretty much. And it is just, I mean, it's right in the name. Like it's literally the middle of the name, Lemuria. So this guy Churchward comes along. He pretty much tells Lemuria, his version of Lemuria. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. For after Blavatsky, everybody just kind of comes along and tells their version of the Lemuria story, adding their own fucking crazy shit that is influenced by the time they live in, their belief system, and it just keeps. And then and the next generation comes along, and they take that and they kind of add their fucking attitude to it. Kind of for the folks who listened and remembered, who remember the earlier show we did with Tobias and Emily Wayland on the holidays traditions, in a sense, very much like that, much like that, where it's like, how did the Christmas we know today come to be? But this book's like, how did the Lemuria we know today come to be? And that's how it happened. Like over different generations, more people, more esoteric researchers added their own spin on this until like. You can use this line if you want someday, Justin. If Lemuria sank into the ocean, it was under the weight of all this fucking theories and ideas and concepts that get piled on Lemuria. That's why it vanished into the ocean. So tell me about Churchward. He coins Moo.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually ever say it's Lemuria, but it's essentially, so people who, if there's ever any confusion out there from people, I feel like I've talked a lot tonight, but I
you're fine, man. It's good. I'm not a talker, so you talking as much as you are. That's
there you go.
Fine by me.
Well, because to me, also for future reference for Binnall America listeners, like next time after you hear this show tonight, next time you hear someone mention Lemuria, you'll know. You'll fucking know. You'll be like, all right, we're going down the fucking crazy path now because I know for a fact Lemuria was coined by this guy in the fucking to explain the lemurs on Madagascar. So get the fuck out of here with Lemuria. So to tie that in with the Moo thing, so Churchward, he's responsible for Moo, which is also Lemuria, essentially.
Yeah. So he was another fascinating kind of weird guy. Colonel James Churchward. He was a British guy, kind of served in the British Army and India, and his backstory screams a lot of like Blavatsky. Like Blavatsky, he traveled up to northern India, Tibet area, and learned from some secret masters there, some secret language, and on some secret tablets. And then he spent like the next 30 or 40 years just like wandering the earth. And as part of his wanderings, he met a couple in Mexico called the Le Plongeons. And say they were this mystical archaeologist couple that had gone down to Mexico and started just excavating, Mayan and Aztec ruins and stuff like that there. And they started publishing kind of these like weird stories based on their findings from their excavations. And so he became really good friends with them. And that's actually where the idea of Mu comes from, because there was like a Queen Mu, a Mayan princess or queen. And there was a whole huge soap opera around her life. And so she had to take off across Atlantis into Egypt, where she founded the ancient Egyptian society. And then she had to come back and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of where the idea of Mu comes from. And then Churchward also he developed during World War I, this special steel making process that was stolen by the Allies. And so he ended up suing them and getting a lot of money in his settlement. And that's kind of what fueled his Mu research. It's kind of crazy. He just created this steel making in NSV steel process. And so with that money, he would go out and throughout the 1920s and 30s, he wrote this series of books on Mu, which was his fabled lost continent out in the Pacific Ocean. And it's crazy because over those 6 books, right? So right in the 1920s and 1930s, right? 40 or 50 years after Blavatsky, you got a couple of decades after other second wave theosophists coming around. Lemuria's in the air, and in California, that's when you start seeing Lemuria pop up in Mount Shasta and places like that. So Lemuria's kind of around everywhere, but he makes a purpose not to mention Lemuria one bit in all 5 or 6 of his books, and it's all Mu all the time. Yeah. But his is strange just because he talks about his Lemuria is very big. His Mu is very big out there in Pacific Ocean. It talks about very much it's like an idyllic place. It's basically the Garden of Eden. It's the inspiration for the Garden of Eden and all these kind of Elysian fields and kind of things like that. And he goes into the people and all of that stuff, but he spends a lot of the books just doing cultural appropriation, basically, and just saying, these native cultures or Pacific Islands share these traits or writings with Egyptians and all that kind of stuff. So it's very kind of diffusionist and making those kind of claims but it was really popular stuff for what it was. I don't think it spread out throughout the culture, but you would have, it's very much influential on Ray Palmer and people,
right.
A generation later, they would know his stuff.
Right. Like I was saying, every successive generation of esotericists, if you will, picks up from the previous one, who's informed by the previous one. And really, as we were saying, that all begins with Blavatsky, who kind of puts it into the world of the strange, if you will. Now, my favorite character in the book, is Philip. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Let me start that over.
Okay, you're good.
What is the count on that? 64.
There you go.
I want to fix that. Edit that little fuck up out. All right. That's all I can idiot. All right. Now, my favorite character in the book is Frederick Spencer Oliver. I found this guy to be just fascinating and fun in a way. Just an odd character who kind of, you almost feel bad for him in a way because he had this dream of putting forward this book. And what amazed me, and we're going to get into the whole story in a moment, but what really, the real sticky point for me, what really amazed me was his book, A Dweller on Two Planets, which came out in 1904, is this seminal work that I had never heard of, but influenced all of these esotericists for generations afterwards. It's kind of been lost in the ether, I suppose, unless you're I'm sure there are super hardcore folks out there, but all American listeners, because these are the hardest of the hardcore folks. So I'm sure there are people out there Dweller on Two Planets. Come on, Binnall, what are you just getting into this yesterday? But I was completely unfamiliar with A Dweller on Two Planets. And it, as I said, it's like this seminal work of early 20th century esoteric writing, knowledge, influence. It's a huge book. Like as I'm reading your book and going through, it just amazed me how many times A Dweller on Two Planets popped up. Like fucking 20 years, 30 years later, 40 years later, it's like, that, like, wait a minute, fucking A Dweller again?
Yeah,
Dweller on Two Planets again? This is somehow we sifting into the story. It's really remarkable. So we'll start out. Tell us about Frederick Spencer Oliver and what is this A Dweller on Two Planets that I'm just mystified by.
And I must say, like, it's still relevant to this day. Like, you get the
I really want to read
stuff,
it.
The whole I am movement stuff.
I
it
kind
is
of want to get my hands on it.
You can get like a free copy online. It's in the public domain and stuff like that. But and like I was watching Hellier season 2 last year, and they brought it up. They just like waved it out. There's this book here is talking about people underground and stuff like that. And so it's still very much like in this world, people are still talking about it. But you nailed it right on the head. He was my most fascinating person researching. I wish I want to learn more about him, just because he lived a short life, but it was and everything that like influential about him happened, decades after he died too.
Yes, he's like a tragic figure almost.
It kind of is. He really much is. And so he was born in like 1866, I believe, right after the Civil War. His dad, I believe, was served in the Civil War. He was born in Washington, D.C., and they moved to California when he was really young. And so they kind of hopped around his family. His dad was a doctor and also a newspaper man. Like a frontier, like Western newspaper man. They would, they moved to California, lived in California for a while, then moved up to Oregon, moved to Nevada, and then moved back to California. And they kind of settled in the Santa Barbara area of California.
Yeah.
So in part of those travels, like his dad apparently owned land or property around Mount Shasta. And so when he was 17 years old, Frederick Spencer Oliver was, the story goes, was surveying a piece of property for his dad out there. And as he was writing down a note, his hand started like writing something else. And it was the first time that his entity known as Philos came to him and spoke through him. And so it freaked him the hell out. And so he hightails it back home. And then Philos starts coming to him more and more frequently. And so it started out with like kind of automatic writing, and then it became more channeled, like channeling him. And so, a year or so happens, and then he finally like introduces Philos to his parents. And they weren't like, and they were kind of like, it was the way he describes it. They weren't like you're fucking insane. It's just like,
they're like,
okay.
Tell us more.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like the joke, like, is Philos in the room with us now? And that was kind of, but that wasn't like in a mean-spirited way. It was more of a curious way, where it was
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to speak with Philos if you could. That would be great.
Yeah, it was like, he only speaks to me, actually. So, but that's the classic kind of like cult thing, or like something like Blavatsky did too with her Ascended Masters. They only spoke to her, and she only had access to him, to them. And so that was very much the same thing with Philos and Frederick. And then pretty soon Philos was like, you need to write this book. I have this book in mind that I need to write, and you're the guy writing it. And so, so he begins as a teenager writing A Dweller on Two Planets. And so, and it's a very, very early channeled work.
Right,
so, we have a lot of like, now we have, channeling's basically second nature. And so like when he was doing it, it was like, there was like one other, channeled work at the time. So, and then he spent a number of years trying to get it published. But he never could. So he became a newspaper writer himself, writing out of Santa Barbara. And you can still go online and like find his like articles on agricultural happenings in Santa Barbara and stuff like that. And so it's kind of fun. And the most interesting thing about him, and I just actually I have a newsletter that I write, and I wrote a more detailed story on his relationship with this former prostitute who killed her her husband in the Los Angeles City Hall. And to do the backstory for this, you have to go back to the book. And so the book, A Dweller on Two Planets, is this very kind of like dense, esoteric Christianity tome. And so by way of Atlantis and by way of like going inside Mount Shasta and then being spectrally projected onto Venus and meeting other ascended masters. So you get this really like kick-ass sci-fi stuff going on, but that's like 10 pages, and the other 400 pages are like just really weird esoteric Christian sayings. And so it's like, and so the whole book is Philos telling his life story. And he started off as a Atlantean nobleman who gets into a love triangle, and one of his lovers turns the other lover into a like statue, and then she kills himself, and he becomes like lovelorn and ends up dying, but he learns a lesson of like, I guess money doesn't like solve everything or whatever. But during his Atlantean times, they have this really interesting, he flies around on basically an airship, right, but it's also submersible. So it's like a submarine airship.
Right. So transmedium is the UFO term. It's what UFO people would consider, transmedium craft that can go into the water, out into the air, and all that good stuff.
And I think the cool, and I think the picture is actually in the book. I don't know if you remember
the picture is in the book.
But this was before the Great Airship Flap of 1897. And so if you look at that thing, it kind of looks like one of the airships.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. And so I wonder if that's one of my big theories, is like, wonder if like his work was like influential on maybe one of his,
well could have been.
Yeah, one of his like adherents had read the book, and I came up with this idea of something like that. But that's beside the point. I'm sorry. So his Atlantean person dies, passes away. He gets reincarnated back, born in Washington, D.C. He serves in the Civil War. This new person is called Walter Pearson. And he shares a lot of similarities with Frederick's dad as well. So he also moves out west. He moves around. And Walter Pearson meets a mystical Chinese man who takes him within Mount Shasta. And as they're palling around like Northern California together, they meet this basically prostitute. She's not even really, I don't think she's a prostitute. I think she's just an alcoholic woman. And they kind of like, they save her, and they give her some money, and she goes off. And then Walter Pearson goes into Mount Shasta and has, this mystical experience. And then he comes out, he's a changed man. And he's traveling the world, and he meets her again in, I think Italy or someplace like that. Yeah. And they fall in love, and they get married. And then, he gets bored with life. So he decides to, if I'm rambling, it's because the book is rambling too. Yeah. So this
is a dweller on two planets.
Yeah, it's a dweller. Yeah, you have to deal with two planets. And so, he becomes bored with life, takes a job on a steamer, and the steamer like crashes in the ocean, and he dies. And that's the end of the book. It's like him dying on this steamboat. And so that's the setup for the newspaper man, Frederick Spencer Oliver, coming across this story, like the newswire of this former prostitute, Teresa Kerr, killing her husband. And so he sees that and he's like, wait a second, this is what I've been preaching for decades. Like, this is my story here. I need to save this woman. And so he starts trying to ingratiate himself into her like defense team. He sends his wife to make her like, send her letters, saying, you know, you should come live with us and stuff like that. He sends his mom to her to try to adopt her. This is like a 20-something-year-old woman, and like Frederick Spencer Oliver's mom is there trying to adopt her. He sends his lawyer/literary agent to the legal team to try to like take over her defense and things like that. And it's really, really strange. And her story is really strange too, but it ends up, she gets acquitted. And then he dies like later that year. And it's kind of like his death certificate says cirrhosis of the liver. And so I was trying to figure out, like, was he a raging alcoholic as well? Just because, I think at the time there was there wasn't many diagnoses for cirrhosis of the liver outside of alcoholism. And so I was trying to, that makes it even like more tragic a figure of like, this guy couldn't get his, you know, book sold,
book published.
He couldn't get his book published. He couldn't like get his cult off the ground because, he would have these meetings, where he would channel Philos and people would come around and listen to him talk about Philos and things like that. And so, and that never like took off.
It never took off because he needed the book to like get it out to other people and shit and get it more widespread. And he just couldn't get it published, which is like as I said, that makes him like the tragic figure, because then after the book gets published, then he has this, as I said, it's a seminal work in the history of the esoteric, for as bizarre as it is of a book. And what's interesting, kind of like what we were saying here about Ignatius Donnelly, he's the one who really injected Atlantis into the contemporary zeitgeist. Another fascinating, again, one of those litmus tests that people who hear tonight's show can later, and read the book, can later look, and they hear someone say something like about Mount Shasta, you can go, ping, all right, this person's probably full of shit. Because as you point out, you mentioned this story in the book, in A Dweller on Two Planets, of the guy being brought into Mount Shasta and shown all this stuff. That's where fucking Mount Shasta becomes the Mount Shasta we know and love as a paranormal hotspot, mystical location, legendary place of lore where, you know, there could be, quote unquote, various races of people living in all of that traces back to A Dweller on Two Planets and Frederick Spencer Oliver. That like completely blew my mind. It's kind of like the whole Lemuria thing where it's like, where did this even come from? I never gave it a second thought. I'm just kind of like, oh, Mount Shasta, it's a mystical place. They've always thought that. Like, well, no, it turns out they haven't. It turns out people have only thought that since 1904 when A Dweller on Two Planets was published. So it's incredible. The influence, again, tragic figure. It's like the influence this guy had. He unknowingly turns Mount Shasta into this landmark of mysticism by virtue of the book. It's really tremendously, it's mind-blowing in a way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he died in 1899. His mom like worked tirelessly to get the book published, and she finally got it published in 1904. No one read that edition. And so it wasn't until she teamed up with like a kind of amateur tourist astronomer guy named Edgar Lucien Larkin. Yeah. And he had this popular column that he would write in California newspapers that were on like science and weird stuff. And so she got the book to him, and he really pushed it out in his columns and actually got a second edition printed in the like mid 1920s. And that's kind of when like A Dweller on Two Planets exploded. And, you know, you started having the Rosicrucians getting a hold of it, and they really the ones that took the book, took Edgar, the Larkin, and injected Lemurians into the Mount Shasta and the whole idea, and made Mount Shasta really like second to only like Sedona in terms of like spiritual, you know, spiritual meccas in America. But it's also, it has this just bunch of weird stuff happening all around it too, all coming from basically people going there expecting to see weird things.
Yes.
So it's kind of like a self prophecy going on there too. So it's really fun. It's really like interesting to see the genesis of how that all happened with just this one book.
Yeah. And you have like throughout that chapter of the book, like all these instances where these various colorful characters in the esoteric world kind of like, it's like they heard of the book, they read the book or whatever, they're like, oh, Mount Shasta, that's interesting. You know, maybe I'm going to throw Mount Shasta into my shit now because this is, I like the sound of this Mount Shasta, so I'm going to throw it in, and now I'm going to add in people who live inside of it, and it becomes, and all these different writers and things start putting things in and kind of like connecting it to the Lemuria topic that we're talking about. The alleged inhabitants of Mount Shasta are said to be Lemurians. That's kind of the whole people who are like, how does this? That's how now they're in a way. It's interesting because somewhere along the way, and maybe it is with A Dweller on Two Planets, as we pointed out, like. Blavatsky turns Lemuria into a concept, but maybe it's Frederick Spencer Oliver, but maybe it was someone else. You can correct me, but at some point, the Lemurians become just a race of people in and of themselves, like almost without a home. Mm-hmm. They're like, we used to live on Lemuria, but now we live in the Mount Shasta. So that's kind of like it adds a whole nother element to it, where it's like Lemuria is not just a fake place; it's a fake race of people that allegedly, you know, say they come from the fake place. Yeah.
And it's amazing that people interact with them too. Like they're like, people have real experiences with beings that they call Lemurians and things like that. And that you see that popping up all over the place with Mount Shasta. You have, and I tried to do research on Lemurian Mount Shasta and like the ideas behind it. And like I was running across all of these like travel logs about people like hiking up on the mountain, never experiencing anything in like the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, 1910s. Like time and time again, like there was no stories that I was seeing that was popping up saying like, you know, anything weird was happening on the mountain or anything like that. And this was time of yellow journalism when weird stuff was, you know, encouraged to happen too. So I wasn't seeing that with Mount Shasta. And it wasn't until, you know, A Dweller on Two Planets, but also when Harvey Spencer Lewis, the founder of Amherst, the ancient mystical order of Rosicrucians.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I got that right, actually. That was pretty good. So he wrote a book under the auspices of Wishar Spinlay Lewis, or Spinlay. It's an anagram for his name. I forget what it was. Yeah, Survey. Yeah, Wishar Spinlay Survey. So he wrote a book called Lemuria, the Lost Continent in the Pacific. And that's where he brought all of these ideas into there being a Lemurians living inside of Mount Shasta and using basically like this just phony made up story of Edgar Larkin witnessing Lemurians like dancing around Mount Shasta and like these buildings on Mount Shasta, these like crazy marble gold buildings on the mountain himself. And so, so California's a huge fucking place, right? So it's a huge state. Larkin's observatory was just outside of Pasadena, in the mountains outside of Pasadena. down near Los Angeles. And so 300, 400 miles away in Mount Shasta, he was apparently observing all of this happening, going on. And so it's kind of, farcical to think that.
Yeah, that's a wild story that informs the NORAC or whatever the group is. Yeah. The author there that you're talking about. I should have put him in the notes because he was critical to the whole thing too. Yeah. But yeah, he bases all this on this alleged story of this real person who was like working at the observatory and and there's no record whatsoever of this guy's story. He's just like, I heard the story that he did this, and apparently the guy who it happened with was pretty fastidious in his notes and shit. So it's like he never mentioned spending a whole week watching a bizarre scene unfold on Mount Shasta from 600 miles away, which is physically impossible due to the curvature of the Earth.
I was going to say, maybe if it was a flat Earth, it would have been a little bit more possible. But yeah, no, it was. But Lewis's book, Lemuria, The Lost Continent of the Pacific, was actually well known as well. Like it became popular, and it influenced a lot of people to flock to Mount Shasta. And right. And that's when like a lot of the kind of weird occurrences really start happening, is after this like flocking to Mount Shasta. And it got so bad that the Forest Service, which ran Mount Shasta at the time, had to like put out a press release saying, you know what, guys, we've been all over this mountain. We've filmed every part. We've flown flights over top of it and filmed it. We have not seen one Lemurian. We have not seen one building. We have not seen anything like this going on. And it's also so many people were going there and not experiencing things. And it was kicking back on Amherst that they had to print a story saying, you know what, guys, you screwed up a good thing. The Lemurians, they actually
yes, I remember this part.
And moved down to Mexico because of you assholes. Asshole tourists are just ruining the place. Yeah. And so it's kind of
yeah, I forgot about that, but that's a fantastic aspect of the story. Yeah, they're like, oh shit, we caused a real ruckus here, so we better backpedal, and then made up this insane fucking story where it's like, we left a couple people to leave the lights on. We left a couple of Lemurians to leave the lights on. The rest of us are now in Mexico. So we're not telling you where though, because God knows we don't want that to happen again. Yeah, that was So that's such a fantastic chapter in the book. I just love that part so much because it is so influential. The Dweller on Two Planets, early channeling. It's really, this book really sort of highlights some forgotten people in a lot of ways. Like I said earlier, Ignatius Donnelly is sort of a prototypical conspiracy theorist. You got Frederick Spencer Oliver as a prototypical channeler. It's like these are sort of the very first people to kind of develop these art form, for lack of a better term, of conspiracy theorizing or esoteric theorizing, if you will. It's really a lot of folks that I'd never heard of before are showcased in the book. It's really I loved it. I really loved it.
And I would say I talked about motivations earlier, and so you can see where the success of Donnelly in his book. You can see the success of A Dweller on Two Planets, or the eventual success of it, and how people see that, and then they say, okay, how can we recreate that? How can we build upon that, or do something similar to to gain off of that kind of success.
Take advantage of this buzz. Yeah, exactly. So I guess heading into what you point out in the book is kind of what you would call peak Lemuria, or at least as far as public consciousness of this thing is, beyond people with an interest in the strange and unusual. This is when Ray Palmer encounters Richard Shaver, and Richard Shaver he's had these experiences. He believes that he's. I think I should have you set this up because I don't remember exactly what Richard Shaver's deal was now in retrospect. And there are listeners who are like, know Richard Shaver's story backwards and forwards. But Ray Palmer essentially is like the publisher of these sci-fi magazines. What was interesting to me reading the book was like, again, this is sort of an era that I haven't really dug too much into. I know as I've gotten, I know of this because it's a little closer to our contemporary time. Ray Palmer and Richard Shaver and the Shaver Mysteries and all that. But to me, it was like I hadn't really realized that, there was all these science fiction magazines that were like dedicated to real science fiction. Like it was like the science had to be right or something. It was kind of like which is interesting in and of itself. And so Ray Palmer came along, and then he was like, he got mixed up with Richard Shaver and started putting them in the magazines, and people were like, what the fuck is this, dude? You got a guy claiming that he has a spiritual psychic memory, I think it was. He has a psychic memory of living in Lemuria, and he has a whole mythos that he's conjured up in his mind and written down, and Ray Palmer's like, he knows a good thing when he sees it, so he starts publishing this shit. Mm-hmm. As you point out in the magazine, first he publishes, and I'm stunned that this became such a thing. He publishes this like fucking really arcane letter from Richard Shaver, where Richard Shaver breaks down this alphabet, and it makes no sense. But apparently, like, it resonated with the people who read the magazine, and they flooded the Ray Palmer with letters and shit about this bizarre letter about the alphabet and shit. And I think you mentioned it's like tucked away on like a far back page next to an ad for something silly or whatever. It was like a complete throwaway filler part of the thing. And even I think you said that one of the editors of the magazine like got it and threw it in the trash, and then Ray Palmer went over and took it out of the trash and was like, let's put it in the magazine. Which, God bless him, that's a paranormalist after my own heart.
Yeah. It's a good newspaper man too. Like, it's just a good publisher.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's set into motion the Shaver and Palmer story. So I guess refresh me a little bit about Richard Shaver. What the hell was his background that he wound up believing that he could remember Lemuria, for lack of a better, to pardon the pun, if you will.
Yeah. So, Richard Shaver was like born in Pennsylvania. Had like just a normal American like boy upbringing. Like not particularly, dedicated to school or anything like that. Throughout the early Depression, he had a bunch of odd jobs. He lived with his brother. His brother eventually moved to Detroit. And so, Richard followed him. And he had this like kind of like cool life living in Detroit. He went to art school there. He got into a relationship with one of like the adjunct professors at the college. He was doing like nude modeling himself. He became involved in like the avant-garde underbelly of Detroit. And so he was still living with his brother at the time. His brother worked for the, like the Border Patrol or something along those lines. Yeah. And this was during the time of Prohibition. And so he, for whatever reason, Shaver had to drop out of art school, or the art school actually closed down. He married that woman. They got pregnant. He needed to get a job. And so he got a job at a auto factory. And then his brother eventually passed away. And so his brother had kind of intimated that he was having some problems at work. And so this was during like Prohibition. And so there was a lot of, liquor running across the border and stuff like that. And so, but his brother, I think, died of pneumonia or something along those lines, or like a heart attack.
Sounds to me, yeah. Based on the reading in the book, it sounded to me. Now my memory's refreshing. It very much sounded to me like Shaver kind of, for lack of a better term, lost his fucking mind when his brother died. His idol, his hero died, and his life was already kind of tumultuous as it is. and he kind of went down the rabbit hole of like paranoia. You know, whether he could be diagnosed with something, I don't know, but it was like he certainly seemed to kind of lose his mind when his brother died and came up with all these conspiracy theories. And then next thing you know, he
started hearing voices. And so he started hearing voices through his drill that he was using at work. They were telling him things like, everybody thought he was like a homosexual. Everybody was like, he was a communist, all this kind of stuff coming out. And so he was just hearing that in his head. And so, he was committed. His wife had him committed. And so he spent a couple of years in a mental institution there in Michigan. It was during that, the first time he was institutionalized, his wife died. It was like an accident, like an electricity accident. And so for some reason, his wife's parents gained guardianship over him. And so they
this is really the wildest part of the story. Yeah. They're like, they don't want him to anywhere near the fucking kid.
Yeah, exactly.
So they like essentially they Britney Spears him essentially. They we're gonna put you in the fucking mental hospital and we don't want don't ever let him out. Essentially was kind of what they told the mental hospital.
Yeah. But the mental hospital was, I guess, very liberal in its leave policies because they allowed him to travel back to Pennsylvania to like hang out with his parents. And so it was on one of these trips that he just kind of skedaddled and spent life on the run for a few years. And this would formalize the basis for it. I think the second Lemuria story that came out. And so it was here that he started getting the idea that there were these underground race of evil midget dwarves out to kind of like destroy the world, or not so much destroy the world, just like fuck with humanity.
Cause chaos.
Just like pure chaos actors. And so they would do anything from, steal your car keys to, kill Kennedy. Like, basis for everything. Yeah. And so
for all ills can be traced back to the Darrows.
Exactly. And that was his name for them, the abandoned Darrows, or Darrows for short. And so they were always hounding him for whatever reason. He would be institutionalized later, also like in the late 30s and moving into the early 1940s. And then as soon as it was during that kind of like second institutionalization that he really like formalized his ideas about what was going on and the whole like world making of these Darrows. And so that's when you have this ideas of like different kinds of rays controlling people, and they can do different kinds of things. He came up with his own ideas about gravity, which he would share with Einstein, and Einstein kindly said, please don't mail me anything anymore. And so, and it was right after he got out that he mailed his letter to Ray Palmer, and that started their relationship with one another.
Yeah. So he's publishing this shit, Ray Palmer is, and what's fascinating to me is like it's becoming more and more popular, but it's very sort of like modern in a way. If you look at it kind of like contemporaneous pop culture in a way. This was pop culture of the time. So it was like the people, the hardcore fans who want hard science in their fiction were like, what the fuck is this, dude? You're ruining the genre, man. You're ruining the genre, to the point that he kind of like had to eventually, they kind of had to go their separate ways. And he went off and was, I think Ray Palmer was kind of like, all right, this is where it's at. This crazy shit is where it's at. So he started Fate magazine and kind of went for, he just kept going with the crazy shit. Yeah. And left the hard science fiction to the nerds. So,
yeah, right. Yeah. But then it's funny is he kind of lost interest in the Shaver mysteries because of flying saucers. Like the whole Arnold sighting and everything happened right at the same time as like the last Shaver mystery was being published in Amazing Stories. Right. And so he was kind of superseded by UFOs. So
Yeah, and I can see also where it's like there wasn't really as much cynicism or skepticism surrounding the UFO phenomenon at the time. So I can imagine, like, you're Ray Palmer, you're publishing this, with all apologies, this crazy person's, like, ramblings.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fucking popular and shit. I think at one point you mentioned that at one point, like, the magazine, I think it was Amazing Stories, but I'm not positive, was
amazing. Yeah,
selling like 250,000 copies a month or whatever at a time when 20 or 30,000 copies a month was considered success. So they were like 10 times what would be considered a success. So this is enormously popular stuff. But I can imagine in his mind, it's like these these UFOs. This is actually something that's happening. Like that is, what it is, I don't know. We still don't know. But what it is at the time, even, it was like, this is extremely strange because no one's ever heard of these UFOs before. Now they're flying, these flying saucers are being seen. And so I can imagine, I could see him wanting to, like, pivot away from the ramblings that they're almost certainly fiction to something that very well may be true. That's something that might actually be that is legitimately happening, rather than someone's like recollections of a previous bygone era. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And he was getting a little more and more flack too from fans. Like, there were a lot of fan groups and organizations, like fan clubs, the science fiction fan clubs coming out, and they were like reporting them to the censors and stuff like that. And then the whole thing about the Shaver Mysteries was like, Palmer throughout the whole thing was like, this is true. All of this stuff happened. This is not where I know we're a science fiction magazine, but all of this stuff happened. And so I think that's what really like pissed people off. And it got like his publisher started like leaning on him to knock it off as well. And so he was receiving a lot of pressure from a lot of different angles. And so he eventually was like, you know what, Ray, or you know what, Richard, you can have your Shaver Mysteries. You can go off and do what you want with them. And he eventually and Palmer himself left Amazing Stories shortly after, giving up the Shaver Mysteries as well too.
Right. Yeah, like I said, I think he ventured off and eventually started up Fate magazine. So it's kind of like you can see the writing on the wall. Where like, all right, this UFO thing is where it's at, and these sci-fi fans don't want me to even get into the fucking weird. So I'm going to go where the interest is.
Yeah. And he surreptitiously like started Fate magazine and was editing that and producing that while still doing Amazing Stories. Yeah, he was like doing it on the down low. I don't think his name appeared on maybe the first couple issues, or if they did, it was he just didn't want his boss to basically, or the publishers at Ziff Davis to know that he was, had a rival
producing
magazine.
A second magazine.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't have gone over well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where, as you pointed in the book, that's like peak Lemuria. That's kind of when it enters the modern zeitgeist, if you will. That's
it was covered in Time magazine or Life, I think, and like the whole shebang was covered in newspapers, and it was getting a lot of press.
Yeah, that was Lemuria's like 15 minutes of fame. So, like, for people who are listening to this, as we've talked all along, it's like Lemuria was always sort of, ever since it was first put out by Sclater, in 1864, it was kind of always floating around, changing, evolving and shit. And then it was like, this is when it became, I think, to the public, and it's still not like, you kind of have to even still be a little in the know to know Lemuria. Yeah. It's like everybody knows Atlantis. It's like, but Lemuria is for the hardcore.
Yeah, it's the velvet underground too of lost continents. You have to
right.
The cool kids know about it, but everybody else, the hipsters.
Yeah, exactly. And taking the transformation of Lemuria, this is when Lemuria. So we've gone from it's a fucking possible land bridge. Then it's like the cradle of civilization. Then it's the cradle of spirituality. Then it's possibly connected to, it's inside Mount Shasta. The people moved to Mount Shasta. And then that's when it goes underground, literally.
Yeah.
Like that's when the underground elements get weaved into this concept. As I said, it just keeps piling on different versions and ideas. It's like a blank slate that different people over the course of time have used to put forward their wild ideas in a way.
Yeah, and like with the Shaver mysteries, you start getting the beginnings of the reptilian conspiracy theories and stuff like that as well. And so it's it's a piece of that puzzle too. So it's out there.
Right. So I don't want to we'll just kind of wind the book down in a way that moves into the New Age movement and their adoption of Lemuria. What I thought was really interesting here is at some point, some jerk writes a sequel to A Dweller on Two Planets. Blasphemy. And this is like 50 years at least, or something like that. 50 or 60 years after A Dweller on Two Planets. They put out a sequel, cruelly put out a sequel, and like shit on poor Spencer Oliver, the tragic figure of the Lemuria story, where they're like, yeah, he fucked it all up. This is what we meant to tell him. This is the new version of A Dweller on Two Planets. So it was like even the seminal work is being repurposed, and so that's kind of moving all along, and it just becomes a part of this New Age movement where, as we said, like Blavatsky kind of acknowledged the background of this. Now it's just this placeholder. It's this thing. If you need, it's like we said, Lance has been too commodified. If you need that blank slate place where a mystical being could have come from, or a mystical being could have landed, or something could have sprung up, Lemuria, there's your fucking answer. That's the catch-all blank slate that a lot of New Agers then started using as, and it kind of it just all gets mixed in, sort of contactees. Oh, we're Lemurians and we went to Venus. It's like, the funny part is, you mentioned this kind of in a way, it's like, that's the fucked up part where it's like, okay, so there's no way, because we know where Lemuria came from, there's no way, like, if an alien landed on Earth, he'd be like, I'm from Lemuria. Because it's like, dude, that's made up. That would be like if they showed up and they were like from, I don't know, Middle Earth or whatever. I'm trying to think of a made up.
I think I used that.
Yeah, Duckburg, yeah. It's like, if an alien showed up and he was like, yeah, I'm from Lemuria, I'd be like, you're a fucking liar, dude. Because there's no Lemuria.
Yeah.
Like, haven't you read Justin McHenry's book? Here, read this fucking book. So next guy you show up to in their backyard, you got a more plausible story.
Yeah.
But that's the weird part, as every time someone needs a place, a mystical place, it's like all of a sudden it becomes Lemuria.
Yeah. It's has very much become a spice that gets added to a backstory.
Yes.
And so it's in that like New Age period where it becomes a accepted fact that there was a place that called Lemuria. Now, what happened on that Lemurian place? Who like it changes per the person's motivations and needs for them, but it's very much a real place to them. Just so they can have happen on there, and the people on there can do things to help out them now. Right.
Yes. At one point you mentioned in one of the New Age stories told by someone, and it may have been the sequel to A Dweller on Two Planets, but it's like they added in a bunch of shit about the labor laws on Lemuria, because it was like they're trying to get a point across, obviously, about labor laws in America or whatever. And it's like, well, the fucking labor laws on Lemuria were this way, and maybe if we emulated the way that this ancient culture did things could be better here now in the 1970s. And it's like, there's no fucking Lemuria, dude. There was no Lemuria. This is insane. This is craziness.
So the funny thing about that book, it's called An Earth Dweller Returns. It was published by the Lemurian Foundation, which is still around today. It's still around and kicking. Mostly written by a guy named Howard John Zitko, who was one of the co-founders of the foundation. But he was into all of that stuff. He was into like political, motivations and like labor laws and shit like that. And so, of course, he's going to put that into his book. And the funny thing about Our Thriller Returns is like, it's like Philos comes back and he's like, man, Frederick Spencer Oliver fucked this up royally. So I have to write this like sequel to this book. And it was so bad that the family of Frederick Spencer Oliver sued them.
Yes, so fascinating. I'd like to look at the court case on this one, because this is like, I've never heard of such a crazy ass court case.
Yeah. So the family of Frederick Spencer Oliver sued the Lemurian Foundation or whoever for Our Thriller Returns, saying they were using their copyrighted material. But the judge looked over the case, and because he ruled that because Frederick Spencer Oliver said he was just I don't even know how to say the word.
Channeler or whatever.
Yeah, the channeler. Let's just do that word. Yeah, he was the channeler that he doesn't hold copyright to that law. So so all future channelers should really take that into account when they're doing their work. They should make sure to get a good copyright lawyer.
Yeah. Or like right in the book state, like from the beginning, it's like, my mystical guide has handed over copyright to me. So this is now my property as we begin my communique.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we bring it up to that, with a history book like this, it's impossible to sort of ever stop, really.
Yeah.
Right? No. So Lemuria is going to continue on for as long as people need a place or an origin location or a setting for their story. Lemuria will continue onward. And it is interesting you mentioned sort of at the very end, and it's talk about Kismet. I may flip the order of the episodes, but yesterday I was interviewing Emily Louise, who was a consulting producer on the Love Has Won documentary.
Okay. Yeah, nice.
On HBO. And here I am finishing the book this afternoon, and in the very last 2 or 3 pages, you talk about the Love Has Won cult.
Yeah.
And how the Amy Carlson, the leader of the Love Has Won cult, part of her grand fucking mythos, her fantastic background of being this ascended being who's traveled through different reincarnations. At some point, guess what, folks? She was the queen of Lemuria. So it's that's when I would have exited the cult. I was like, oh, fuck. All right, wait a minute.
Wait a second. Yeah. But that's what I was saying about just being a spice. She just threw that in to
give her sounds awesome.
Yeah. Just give her some bona fides. It's like, well, Lemuria's a place, and she was the queen of it. And, Donald Trump also was her father at one point too. So
yeah, exactly. So that's it. That's Lemuria. It's a part of our culture, especially in the sub-level esoteric culture. It is the spice that that's added to all these fantastic stories. It's really wild. It's really a lot of fun. And like you mentioned, that the QAnon people, even the modern conspiracy theorists, we don't want to end up like Lemuria, guys. We got to get our shit together. It's what the fuck?
Well, it's become a cautionary tale for them. It's basically now Lemurians were persecuted for their beliefs, and woke culture led to their them being nuclear bombed basically, and everything else. So it's a stand-in for what they want it to be.
Right, exactly. Every storyteller really, every storyteller in the history of this thing really, uses it. It projects themselves.
That's a great point. Yeah,
Lemuria. And you make a point. I didn't really want to even dwell on this or talk too much about it, but there's a racial element to a lot of this. Especially at the very beginnings in the scientific part of it, where it was they needed some explanation. They needed some way to differentiate these high-powered white multi-hyphenates, as we talked about earlier. they needed some way to like set themselves apart from the rest of the different races. So they were like, well, we come from Lemuria. We're different. You know, we're above all this. We're chosen people, if you will. So there's a very kind of dark underbelly beneath Lemuria, especially in the earlier times. Yeah. So it's it's there. It should be acknowledged. You know.
Yeah. And throughout the whole history of it too, like as Lemuria and Lemurians were becoming a race unto themselves, like in the whole like Heikel period, they were like Lemuria, like the people on Lemuria were tied to more quote unquote lower races. Blavatsky kind of carried that on in hers as well, and she would like tie Lemurians into other races, and they would make explicit points about
right.
All like each iteration would go into this racial aspect for no reason. Like there was really no reason other than just to prop up their own like white superiority.
Yeah. That's like, it's disappointing. Obviously, it's disheartening. You know, it's like, oh man, like why? Again, it's like, why you gotta fucking go there? That's kind of like as I'm reading it, and it's like, wait, what? Like, what are you getting into? Like, what are you getting into that shit for, dude? But it was part of the culture. That was, you know. So it's like I said, it needs to be sort of mentioned here. But I didn't want to dwell on that because the story of the year is much more fantastical and fun in a lot of ways when you talk about the iterations and the evolution of this, as you say, fake place. Yeah. But this is the true story of it really is a fantastic study of how an idea can be taken and then transformed over successive generations. We're looking at what, like 160 years now since it was first put out there, and you make a great point in the book. It's almost like metaphysical in a way, but it's like it made me think. It was like I was putting together my notes today and was flipping through to find something, and I checked the intro again. And he's like, "What would Lemuria think if it like would it be happy with what it's become after all this time? Would Lemuria? What would its reaction be to its evolution? It's an interesting sort of question."
Mm-hmm. It's I always looked at it as a exploration of how a alternative narrative gets formed. Which is, I think, very important in our day and age now, dealing with, you know, fake news and all that kind of crap that's going on. And so this takes a long look at one narrative and how it has gone through so many iterations and it is ended up where it is now. That's like a long look. Now everything's like really condensed and it gets taken that way. But so going through it, my thought process, or at least towards the end of it, as I was seeing all of this happening, I was like, wow, this is how an alternative narrative, you know, is formed and is created and becomes a new kind of reality. Yeah.
Well, it's fantastic. And like we were saying, you know, there have been whole books written on Blavatsky, and I bet you there are, and Ray Palmer, Richard Shaver.
Yep.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm sure about. I don't know if there's been a book on Ignatius Donnelly, but there probably could be. And a lot of these characters, are you know, worthy of exploration. You don't have to tell the story, but there's a guy in the book, Captain John Clive Sims, who becomes a Hollow Earth enthusiast, who then sends copies of his research to members of Congress, complete with a certificate certifying that he is not insane, which I thought was just fantastic. Which should be adopted by all paranormalists hassling Congress.
Yeah,
you know, we're all you UFO buffs. We're gonna need documentation of your sanity if you're gonna keep calling congressional offices. But
well, I was thinking about, like, while writing it, I was thinking about, because I know you've explored the flat Earth world. Yeah. And so it's like, man, like flat Earth is one thing. Like hollow Earth people are even like stranger and weirder, and it's just even more fascinating. Like, I guess, hole to go down.
Yeah. I've only scratched the surface, no pun intended, of the hollow Earth. So but it is a whole nother milieu of weirdness that it's like, okay, that's another one I'd like to dig into and be like, all right, where did this fucking come from? Who's the first person to really get going on this? And how did it, really change over the years? But it's also, in a way, it's kind of like the flat earth where it's like, there's only so much you can do with, you can do a lot with a hollow earth, but you still can't do too much with it. With Lemuria, like I said, it's this blank slate that people can use and apply to every different, it's like a utility tool here for strange stories, strange tales. It's fantastic. It's really quite the story, quite the concept. I really appreciate you writing this book, man. Said,
thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for reading it and having me on.
I loved it. I hope that people can feel how much I loved this book and how fun it is. We've covered the evolution in 2 hours. Get this book, folks, and read it, because the depth in here of the research is tremendous. We only really gave you the super, the big chapters, the big points as the story evolved. You want to get this book and read it because it has all of it in tremendous detail. Now, we always sort of wrap up the show with, what's next for you. Obviously right now you just came out with the book. I'm sure you put a considerable amount of time into the research of the book. I mean, it's tremendous, as I said, and the footnotes and the references are huge. So I imagine you were slaving away on this book for quite some time. So right now you're just happy to have the book out and to be talking about it and doing shows and stuff. But have you given any thought to what you might want to do next?
Well, I am finishing up a book right now on colonial Philadelphia, so something completely different. Yeah. A publisher reached out to me and was like, "Do you have any ideas about Philadelphia?" And so I was like, "Okay, yeah, I guess so." So I'm finishing that up. That will probably be out at the end of the year. But then I want to do something more esoteric and weird too. So, but I'm kind of scratching that itch with I do a newsletter, and so
Yeah, you mentioned that. Where can people get the news? Do you have a website or anything? Because I couldn't find.
You can find my. I have an author website, justinjmchenry.com. My newsletter is Our Belated Past, OUR Belated Past. It's that Substack. So find that. There's a bunch of just weird stuff that I go into there, and I probably will go. Just more stuff. Like spend the rest of the year doing that, and then maybe try to find a book length topic to write about.
That interests you,
yeah.
That's what's kind of like, in a way, I'm envious because, right when I got into Flat Earth, then someone came out with a Flat Earth book, and I'm like, shit. But like, this is the kind of thing where it's like, you see the book, and I'm like, why didn't I could never have put the amount of work that you did, so I'm glad that you wrote the book, because I couldn't possibly have written nearly as good a book as this. But it's like, that's like genius level fucking topic. It's like, why hadn't I thought of that? A book on the history of Lemuria, that's amazing. So I can imagine you're kind of just waiting for, Kismet to come along and tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, have you looked at, I don't know, I can't even think of anything, but have you looked at Hollow Earth or whatever? Have you thought of some other story that, you and I haven't even come up, haven't even considered that'll pop into your head one day where it's like, oh, I should look into, like the Shakespeare conspiracies or something crazy like that. You know what I mean? So hopefully Kismet does tap you on the shoulder in the not too distant future, because I would love to read whatever you come up with next, man. Because this is
great.
Awesome.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. And like I said, I've been a loyal BOA listener for years now, and so thank you so much for having me on. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, you can ask me anything you want.
Okay, bud. So, I know through Coast, you cover a bunch of stuff. I know through doing Binnall of America and all the people you've talked to, but I don't think you've never had like a paranormal experience yourself, have you?
I've had one paranormal experience. Well, I've had two very benign, sort of boring paranormal experiences. So no, I've never I guess for the record, I've told these stories on other podcasts, but I don't think I've ever told them on Binnall America. So one story, I used to work as an overnight janitor at the time because there was a lot of downtime. This is like right before I got into Coast to Coast, actually. I was doing a lot of reading. So to challenge myself, I was like, I'm going to read the Bible from beginning to end. Not because I had any awakening or anything like that. It was just more like, okay, this is talk about seminal works. This is like the seminal fucking work of all time. So I should probably read it so I have a better understanding of like why of all kinds of stuff, which you do. If you read the Bible, you'll have a tremendously new perspective on the world just because it's informed the world so much. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I was reading the Bible, went out to have a smoke. I was like, it's just crazy how God shows up. He does crazy shit. And like, he's just showing up all the time. I think I was in the Old Testament part at that point. Okay. And I'm like, it's just weird. That shit never happens nowadays. So I'm coming up back in from having my cigarette, and I walked past this elevator that had to be opened with a key. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden the elevator doors just opened. And I was like, and I just stood there and kind of looked over at the elevator, the open elevator. And I was like, that's pretty weird. Yeah. And that was it. Then the doors just closed. And like, to this day, I still kind of regret. I'm like, maybe I should have gone in the elevator. Maybe I should have seen what the, seen what would have happened. So that I unfortunately, nothing's ever happened to me ever since a situation where I could make that choice. But I hope if I ever get into that situation, I'll remember the elevator and be like, just walk into the elevator, man. Just walk in the elevator and see what happens. Yeah. So the other story is, my father passed away in May of 2007, excuse me. My father passed away in 2007. It's been a very long time now. So he was a prankster like me. He appreciated a good joke. So he had this little box thing called the fart machine that and it was remote controlled, and you would I would put it under your chair, and I would go across the room, and then I'd hit the button, and it would sound like you just ripped a huge fart. Yeah. Then I'd be like, Justin, what'd you have for lunch today, buddy? So he loved that thing, and he used it all the time, like whenever we had people over and guests and stuff. So he passed away. We put it away on a shelf like these ones behind me. And it just sat there with the remote on top for like 6 to 8 months or whatever, because my birthday's in late January. It's going to be like in about 10 days. So it was my birthday, the first birthday after my dad died. I had some scratch tickets. Spoiler alert, I did not win. Okay. So people get built up that they think it's going to be the big payoff. So I have the scratch tickets, and I hold them up kind of like, and I'm like, all right, Dad, give me a winner here. And just after I said that, the fart machine went off. And it was the only time it went off. Before then, it never went off again. I think maybe I gotta ask my mother, but I think maybe once it went off, like for my mother, but that was it. It wasn't something that happened all the time where it was like, this thing's annoying. You gotta take the batteries out. It was like, the one I said, come on, Dad, give me a winner. Then the fart thing happened, and then it was like, and I just, again, it was just like, you can't really do it. I didn't do it. It was just like, wow, I think that was, I was like, I think that, I mean, you can't say but it's as close as I can be to knowing. Yeah. That was some kind of communication from my dad from the other side. So those are my two. That's good. Well, that's perfect timing too. Like the timing of that is right. It's like good. It was like a call and answer. Yeah. It was like a call and answer. It was like, what else could explain this? It wasn't like I was walking through the room and the thing went off, or like I said, that it was going off all the time. It was just, I said, come on, Dad, give me a winner. And then it went off, and then it didn't go off again. So it was like, I don't even know where the thing is now. But yeah, that's my only real paranormal experience, but it's pretty solid, I think. Those are good. A lot of people go through life with not having that. I was going to ask you, is there a particular, of everything that you've covered or been a part to, is there one experience that you're like envious of or would want to experience yourself, like see a Bigfoot or I would love to see a Bigfoot. I don't really care I wouldn't care to see a UFO. Yeah. Because it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's too nebulous. Yeah. With a Bigfoot, you're pretty You don't. I mean, you're pretty close to like either seeing Bigfoot or seeing something. You're pretty convinced it's big. You know what I mean? It's like you're close enough to the thing that you know there's a thing there, and you're pretty sure it's some kind of creature.
Yeah,
because it's moving. So it's like I think it's enough confirmation that you would be able to hold on to something with that.
Yeah,
with a UFO, it could be a satellite, could be whatever, could be a shooting star, could be could be Venus. But it's like with Bigfoot, it's like, okay, that's probably either a fucking bear or it's a Bigfoot, and if you're close enough and you talk to the people who are like, they're sure it was a Bigfoot. So it's like, I think that I would know the difference between a bear and a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I'd like to think, because oftentimes they describe the face of the creature, and it's like it was like a human face. So it's like, okay, that's Bigfoot. So that's the most. I would love to see a Bigfoot. That's my big thing. And as far as like from talking to people over the years, it's like I don't know if I'd want to experience it or not, but I'll always be interested in the Adam Davies Bigfoot oral story. Like that's the talk about Seminole. That's the Seminole Binnall of America episode. That's like what I would love to have just been there so I could feel and experience what Adam experienced, so I could have a better understanding of what occurred there. Because I believe that something happened to him, just based on my years of knowing him over the years and knowing him since. It's like something clearly happened to him that night, and I'd love to know. I'd love to have been there as an observer of that, so I could get a better understanding of see it with my own eyes. So,
I heard him. I was gonna say I heard him on the couple episodes ago, and it was
the revival,
and it was very like moving, him talking about like how it has impacted him and affected him. Yeah. I felt bad. I mean, I even said that on the show because I'm like, oh man, I didn't mean to bring up like this traumatic experience. It's like a very odd thing, and I've said many times, like Adam never really profited off of this. He never became like UFO or Bigfoot famous or paranormal famous out of it. He's really shied away from talking about it. So it's to me, it's a really, really weird story. And, it's been like mentioned on other shows, people cited, and I think it's been cited in a couple of books. It's like, it's a really wild story. So, and I'd like to say I'm proud of having that show in the catalog, but it's like, that's all Adam. I mean, I didn't I don't. You got it out of him. So it takes a talent. And,
right. Well, he wanted to talk about it. He contacted me and was like, I need to come on the show and talk about it. You're the only one I can really trust to tell this story to. So I guess I played my part in getting the story out there, but so it's quite the tale. It's quite the tale.
That's a good one.
And I met up with Adam like 6 months after the episode or so, and we went out for drinks and shit, and I was just hitting him with like every question under the sun, just trying to poke holes in the story, but there was nothing there was no way of figuring it out. So it's very wild.
It's not something that you can like blame on like Venus or swamp gas or something like that. Like it's very personal experience.
And John Carlson, his friend, was there with him, so it was like, okay, so this couldn't really have been a hallucination because the guy next to you was seeing the same thing. So it's like this wasn't like food poisoning or drugs or whatever. It's like, no, this doesn't. Yeah, all the reasonable explanations you can think of, and it's like I can't for the life of me imagine that he and John would have concocted this fucking story. So it's one of those stories. It's like it's too. If you want to make up a story, you wouldn't make up something so insanely unbelievable. Like
it's too pure to not be real.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions before?
No, that's it, man. That's all I got for you. Yeah.
My pleasure, man. I really, I think everybody listening knows. I love my listeners. I love the Binnall American listeners. You guys have stuck with me through long hiatuses, and periods of craziness and all that stuff. And it's been an amazing 18 years of doing this show. And I really appreciate the folks who've been on this ride for so long. And you're one of them, Justin. So, and here
we appreciate all of those
catalog.
18 years. And I know it's a lot of work doing this and a lot of thankless work of contacting people and talking to them and, reading their books and interviewing, and then just like the whole process of putting it out.
For sure. But I gotta tell you, man, and I'm not blowing smoke up your ass here. Like, I was thinking this today, and it speaks to the guests we've had on the revival so far, and especially you, because I knew I was talking today, and I was just kind of like, fuck, man, I'm so happy to be back doing this. It is so much fun, and I'm learning so much new stuff that I hadn't really, that I'd kind of given a passing glance to over the years when we weren't doing Binnall America. Now it's like I'm reading so much more. I'm reading the books of these guests, and before it was like when I wasn't doing the show, I didn't read as much. Yeah. Because I really just didn't need to, and I was just kind of lazy. But now, as I'm having guests on who have books, I'm like, okay, I always want to read the book as best I can. Yeah. And so it's like I'm having the time of my life doing this. I'm really having so much fun being back and getting into this stuff that's like, I feel like I'm exercising my brain again in a way that I hadn't in a very long time. So, and this book really, that's kind of what made me think that today. Cause I was just like, man, I'm having a fucking blast. This is going to be awesome tonight. I was really thinking that today. I'm like, I cannot fucking wait to talk to this guy about this book, because this book is so good. And I am so lucky that I get to spend 2.5 hours talking to him tonight about this book that I absolutely love. This is so awesome. And that wouldn't be possible if we hadn't brought the show back. So, I'm really having a good time with it. And I'm so happy that we could have you as part of this, because this is the kind of seriously high quality shit that I want to produce for Binnall of America. Like right now, talking to you, it's going to be like 2 weeks till we get the episode out. I cannot fucking wait till people hear this show. Like I have ever since I got the book in the mail, since I heard about this book, I'm like, this is going to be wild. This is Lemuria. This is going to be crazy. And then I read the book and I'm like, this is going to fucking be beyond wild. This is people need to hear this shit. This is awesome. Yeah. So I'm so excited to roll it out to folks, and I had an absolute blast tonight, and I cannot thank you enough, man. As I said, it started with Kismet, you saying some kind words on Threads, and next thing you know, here we are talking, putting the Lemuria stamp on Binnall of America. So I have to salute you once again. You have a tour de force, man. This is tremendous. We don't do the video here, but I hold it up anyway. Yeah. Lemuria, folks. A true story of a fake place, Justin McHenry. You can get it on Amazon. Get it. Trust me. You want to read this book. You will absolutely love it. And then that's it, man. Thank you so much for coming on Binnall of America.
No, thank you, brother. I appreciate everything. Appreciate your kind words, and appreciate you having me on, and appreciate all of the years of BOA. Years more, too, down the line.
I'll do what I can, brother. Yeah. Thank you. Have a great night.
You too, bud. Have a good one.